They continued to believe what they wanted to believe, just like the people at the Capitol on January 6th did. So, the theory kept growing, only it got even crazier. It expanded into what we know now as QAnon, a wacky, anti-Semitic theory about a worldwide organization of Jewish, Satan-worshipping child abusers, Democrats, actors, and elites. President Biden, President Barack Obama, George Soros, Oprah Winfrey, Tom Hanks, Ellen DeGeneres, Pope Francis, the Dalai Lama, and others, who were not only abusing children, but also drinking the children's blood so they could stay young. Oh yeah, and Donald Trump and other government insiders were secretly fighting against them and will bring the bad guys to justice. It spread like wildfire on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube until it had millions of followers. By the time Welch got out of prison in May 2020, it was everywhere. In fact, there was 36 people running for Congress that year who swore by it. 2 of them were elected. What's so sick is that one of the QAnon influencers who the followers tuned into, a man who called President Biden a pedophile, was in fact a pedophile. David Todeschini, a registered sex offender and QAnon propagandist, served 5 years in prison for the sexual abuse of an 8-year-old boy. Ashley Babbitt unfortunately believed the conspiracy theories and Donald Trump. Babbitt was shot by a Capitol police officer when she defied an order and tried to climb through a window at the Capitol. Babbitt was an Air Force veteran, like my father. She served tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. 6 of her years in service were with the Capitol Guardians Unit of the District of Columbia Air National Guard. Its mission is to defend D.C. and stop any civil unrest. I commend Babbitt for her service, but somewhere along the way, things with her went wrong, and she began a downward spiral. Some of her issues surfaced when she was in the military. She was demoted 3 times. In 2016, she faced criminal charges of reckless endangerment in Maryland. She rear-ended the car of the girlfriend of the man with whom she was having an affair. Babbitt was married to her first husband, Timothy McEntee, when she began an affair with Aaron Babbitt. Aaron Babbitt was living with his girlfriend, Celeste Norris. They had been together for 6 years. When Norris found out about the affair, she moved out and told McEntee that his wife was cheating. Months later, Babbitt, then still named McEntee, spotted Norris's car waiting at a stop sign in Frederick, Maryland. She made a U-turn, chased Norris's car down, and began repeatedly smashing her SUV into it. When Norris pulled over to the side of the road after calling police, Babbitt came up to her window and threatened to beat her up. Norris asked for and received a restraining order against Babbitt because she said she was afraid of her. After continued harassment, Norris received a second restraining order in 2017. Babbitt divorced her first husband and moved with her new one to San Diego, her hometown. By the time she showed up at the Capitol, she had leaned to all the Trump election lies and QAnon conspiracy theories. Beginning in 2016, she used her Twitter account to praise Trump, denigrate undocumented immigrants, and express support for the extremist QAnon. Even before Trump's election, she wrote to him, #love, beside his name and above a photo of 3 signs nailed to a tree. Make America Great Again, H for prison, and Christian deplorables live here. On Election Day, she wrote to Trump, "Today we save America from the tyranny, collusion, and corruption." On January 6th, she messaged that it was up to people like her to reinstate Trump, to stop the Satan-worshipping, kidnapping, blood-drinking elites. Nothing can stop us. They can try and try, but the storm is here and it is descending upon D.C. in less than 24 hours. Dark to light, she wrote. These days, Babbitt is being portrayed as a hero. Trump wrote on Truth Social, his social media platform, Ashley Babbitt was murdered. Trump praised her in one of his speeches and then rebuked to a member of Congress who said the officer who shot her did his job. Trump wrote about the officer who shot and killed great patriot Ashley Babbitt. She has been called a freedom fighter and the first victim of the Second Civil War by right-wing websites and activists. One person wrote, "The beautiful young woman who was executed will be remembered as a martyr." So, on January 6th, we were facing a sea of racist, self-deluded people like Babbitt and a bunch of idiots who just wanted to fight. But also, and here's the truth about who was at the Capitol on January 6th that the media and most people don't talk about. A lot of people outside the Capitol that day were just plain criminals long before that day even happened. I'm talking about thieves and con artists with felony convictions. Let's start with Enrique Tarrio, the leader of the Proud Boys. If you recall, the Proud Boys were the group Trump told to stand back and stand by during the presidential debate when he was asked to publicly reject white supremacist groups like them and the Oath Keepers. They were one of 3 militia groups that played a large role in the Capitol riot. Now, Enrique and 3 of his boys are behind bars after being convicted of seditious conspiracy for their part in the attack on the Capitol. It took a week, but the jury found him and his friends guilty of 31 of 46 counts. The jury's verdict makes Tarrio a 3-time convicted felon. Tarrio began his criminal career in 2004 in Miami when he stole a $55,000 motorcycle and tried to resell it. He pled guilty to 2 felonies, but because it was his first offense and he was young, he was sentenced to 3 years probation and community service. Real criminals like Tarrio, however, don't take a second chance and get on with their lives. They keep lying and thieving. Tarrio was convicted of 4 more felonies a few years later. He and his accomplice were caught after stealing $1.2 million in diabetes test strips from a laboratory and reselling them. This was in 2012. Tarrio was sentenced to 3 years in prison, but he cut a deal with federal prosecutors to provide evidence against his friends so they would be convicted and he would receive a reduced sentence. So after rolling over on 13 other criminals, he was released in December 2014 after 16 months with 2 years probation and ordered to pay restitution for the full $1.2 million. To protect his street cred, Tarrio lies whenever he is asked about being a government informant, but the records are there. Tarrio also pled guilty in 2021 to the destruction of property, which was a Black Lives Matter flag, and a reduced charge of attempting to possess a high-capacity ammunition feeding device and was sentenced to 5 months in prison. Patriot? Let me run down the list of a few more criminals at the Capitol on January 6th. Cash Lee Kelly was sentenced to 60 days in November 2022 for his participation in the riot. But by then, he had been in prison for a year for drug dealing. Kelly had already been convicted when he joined the other insurrectionists in D.C. He was just waiting to hear how much time he would spend behind bars. 1 month after he left D.C., Kelly was sentenced to 4 years in prison and 3 years probation for trafficking cocaine and marijuana in Indiana. Peter J. Schwartz was sentenced in 2019 to 5 years in prison on weapons charges and for terrorizing local residents. Schwartz has a long criminal history. He was only 49, but federal prosecutors say he has had nearly 40 prior convictions over more than 30 years for crimes such as assault or threatening officers. Schwartz was at the Capitol because the prison officials released him and others to protect them from COVID-19, which, without a vaccine, certainly might have killed him. Instead of staying home and going to work in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, he and his wife, Shelley Stallings, decided to come to the Capitol to fight us. That day, a man next to Schwartz grabbed a bag of pepper spray from a Capitol police officer and handed some of the containers to Schwartz. He immediately handed one to his wife and told her to spray the officers in the face. All 3 immediately began spraying the officers' eyes, even as officers tried to turn away. Schwartz also hit an officer with a chair. This is what Schwartz posted on Facebook the day after the attack. What happened yesterday was the opening of a war. I was there, and whether people will acknowledge it or not, we are now at war. Schwartz's wife pled guilty to 7 federal charges. A defiant Schwartz went to trial and was convicted of 4 felonies, including assaulting, resisting, or impeding law enforcement officers using a dangerous weapon, and interfering with a law enforcement officer. He was sentenced in May to 14 years in prison, the longest sentence handed out so far for any of the people who invaded the Capitol. James McGrew, an ex-Marine and QAnon follower, was still on parole for several crimes when he assaulted 2 police officers at the Capitol. He fled D.C. and then led FBI agents on a chase from his home in Carlsbad, California, to Mexico, to Glendale, Arizona, where he was arrested. FBI identified him from a booking photo in 2012 that showed a huge King James tattoo across his stomach. McGrew had been in and out of jail since he left the service in 2008 for multiple thefts in Mississippi, primarily to pay for his drug addiction. By the way, parole is temporary release before the completion of a sentence on the promise of good behavior. McGrew pled guilty for his January 6 offenses and admitted he was the person who shouted, "Let's go," 14 times before pushing barricades into the police to get into the Capitol. Once inside, McGrew struck a D.C. police officer who was trying to move rioters out of the Great Rotunda and later struck another officer and lunged for his baton. In another scuffle with another officer, he successfully snatched the baton. About 45 minutes later, as McGrew was near the Lower West Tunnel entrance, someone in the crowd handed him a detached wooden handrail with metal brackets still affixed to it. He launched a nearly 6-foot piece over his head towards officers in the tunnel, according to the plea. It appeared to strike an officer's visor or shield. Kenny Brian Lazo, 44, came to the Capitol, decked out in a helmet, goggles, and other tactical gear, with an American flag draped around his shoulders. Lazo was recorded running around the Capitol chanting, "Our house." He pled guilty to demonstrating, parading, and picketing in the Capitol building, a misdemeanor. But Lazo had much bigger issues ahead of him. 6 months after January 6, he was arrested on separate charges for contributing to the delinquency of a child under age 13, aggravated sexual battery of a child under 13, intercourse by force, threat, or intimidation, forcible sodomy by force, threat, or of an incapacitated or physically helpless person over the age of 13, and 2 counts of simple assault. Lazo pled guilty in 2 separate cases to 2 counts of assault against a family member. In each case, he was sentenced to 12 months incarceration with 11 months suspended. His sentence included 2 years of uniform good behavior. In other words, no arrest during that time, and substance abuse counseling, and he is to have no contact with the victim. The sexual crimes were not dropped. Instead, they had been held at abeyance as part of the plea agreement. Jia Liu, 26, was arrested after January 6 and pled guilty in October 2022 for entering the Capitol with the other insurrectionists. But before he could be convicted, Liu was arrested for a different crime. He was arrested in February of the same year with an accomplice for distributing vaccine cards to at least 300 people who had not gotten vaccinated, but who wanted proof that they had. The way the scheme worked was that Stephen Rodriguez, a nurse, saw patients who came to the clinic for vaccination appointments, but didn't actually get the shots. Rodriguez allegedly wasted doses of life-saving treatment by disposing of their doses of the vaccine. They are also accused of making more than 70 false entries in immunization databases. Shane Woods was one of the people I told you about who came to the Capitol to pick a fight. He is also one of at least 2 January 6 rioters who were charged a year later in separate incidents with killing people while driving drunk. The other is Emily Hernandez. You may have spotted Hernandez in the photo in which she is standing inside the Capitol, just steps away from the idiot wearing the Camp Auschwitz sweatshirt. She was grinning widely, proud of herself, as she held a piece of the nameplate that belonged to Nancy Pelosi. Woods killed Lauren Wegner of Skokie, Illinois, when he crashed head-on into her car in November 2022. He was driving northbound in the southbound lanes on Interstate 55 in Sangamon County. His blood alcohol level was 1.77, more than twice the legal limit in Illinois. He was fleeing a cop after being pulled over. Just a month earlier, he pled guilty to felony assault of a law enforcement officer and a member of the media at the Capitol on January 6. As the Capitol police officers were pursuing a man who pepper sprayed her, Woods lowered his shoulder and rammed into her, sending her flying through the air and into a downed bicycle barricade. That was at about 2:10 p.m. Woods wasn't finished brutalizing people. At around 5 p.m., he joined a bunch of rioters who were destroying the media's video cameras and other equipment outside the Capitol. When Woods saw a reporter walking away with his video camera, he took a running start and hit the man with a blindside shoulder tackle, knocking him to the ground. The reporter fell and dropped the camera. Hernandez, who lived in Sullivan, Missouri, was driving drunk the wrong way on Interstate 44 on January 5th, 2022, when her car struck the vehicle of Victoria Wilson head-on. Wilson was 32 and lived with her husband in St. Clair, Missouri. Wilson died, and her husband was injured. 5 days after the fatal crash, Hernandez, then 22, pled guilty to a misdemeanor trespassing charge at the Capitol. She was sentenced to 30 days in jail. 2 more heroes? These people shouldn't be called patriots, nor should we feel sorry for them. They didn't care about me or my coworkers. They damn sure didn't care about the rest of America. They were self-centered and self-serving. They were hateful, deluded, and violent. The words hero or patriot should never be applied to them. Let me tell you about a real hero, a real patriot. Her name is Christine. She is 32 years old and in her 6th year as a Capitol police officer. Christine is 5'2" and weighs 135 pounds. There's nothing big about Christine except her heart and her will and her integrity and her commitment. I'm 6'7", and Christine is one of the people I look up to. Christine comes from a military family. Her father served in the U.S. Air Force and later in the Army National Guard. Her brother did 6 years in the Air National Guard, and her sister is still a member of the Air National Guard. And her grandmother? Her grandmother was a U.S. Marine. So, Christine knows a little something about service to her country. Before joining the Capitol Police, she had worked a few jobs as a sales associate for various retail operations. Until January 6th, she thought she may have found her calling. Christine works with me on the first responder unit. Her collateral assignment on January 6th was with the Civil Disturbance Unit, which, as mentioned earlier, is the heavily armored unit whose job it is to control violent crowds. Like all of us, Christine reported early on January 6th around 6 o'clock in the morning and immediately headed for her Civil Disturbance Unit platoon. The unit is made up of several platoons. Each platoon is about 40 people. As she and her fellow officers prepared to put on all their gear on the day of the insurrection, her platoon commander told the unit something Christine had never heard before. They were told not to put on their protective armor. Instead, they were to take their armor to a nearby bus and leave it there. If they needed it, they would sprint from their position to the bus, take about 10 minutes to put on their gear, and then go back to the action and quell the violence. Let that sink in for a minute. Tens of thousands of people who had been invited to the Capitol by the president with a tweet that read, "Will be wild," were gathering outside, and the unit that is trained and geared to quell the violence was told to not be prepared. They were told not to put on the special equipment they use to do their job. Give it another minute. Just like it doesn't make any sense to you, it didn't make any sense to Christine or her team, and it doesn't make any sense to me. When her unit questioned the platoon commander, the commander said those were the orders passed down by leadership higher up. Christine and her unit were assigned to the west side of the Capitol, which is where the biggest crowd was. When they got there, they could see the bus below, but the crowd was already between them and the bus. There was no way they could have even made it to the bus for their armor from where they were. To make matters worse, the bus took off a few minutes later because the driver did not want to get overwhelmed by the crowd. No bus, no gear, no nothing. At around 12:40 p.m., the crowd hopped the barriers. For Christine, it was a frightening moment. When they finally breached that line, I felt an immediate gut punch, she told me. Through all of the demonstrations, they stayed on their side of the barriers, and we stayed on our side. I was just so used to them staying on their side and us on ours. It was shocking. Even during the George Floyd protests, they stayed on their side, and we stayed on ours. Even when we had to go into the crowd, they let us do our police work in peace. They didn't attack us. We didn't attack them. There was no beating on officers. From then on, it was just madness. Christine and the other officers were in hand-to-hand combat. Insurrectionists doused them with WD-40 and bear spray. They pelted them with batteries, beer cans, soup cans, and rocks. They tore away parts of the staging for the upcoming presidential inauguration and used it to beat the officers. Christine told me that the bear spray on her jacket became so thick and it was reactivating in her face. So she stripped down in the biting cold to her vest and a long-sleeve shirt. Ultimately, she found some cases of water about 30 feet from where the action was. She flushed her eyes and went back into the fight. And that, she said, was exactly what it was, a fight. Those people were just looking for a fight, she told me. She repeatedly retreated to flush her eyes and then got back into the fight. One of her friends on the force was hit square in the face. He collapsed. The other officers took him to the Rayburn building, where doctors and medics could treat him. Christine told me she was preparing to go back outside, but some D.C. police officers rerouted her inside to help them chase down the rioters who had gotten into the building. She said she was like a pinball, bouncing from one crisis to the next. She was on the first floor, in the basement, in the rotunda, and around the House chamber. She reminded me of something that so many people have forgotten. In addition to protecting the members of Congress, we had to protect the workers in the Capitol, the cleaning staff, the mason workers, the groundskeepers, the electrical staff, and the restaurant workers. There was more hitting and more kicking. She grabbed hold of one rioter, and he would weasel away, and she and the other officers would chase down another. At one point, she took a heavy blow to the face. She knew it was bad when she got hit, but she said she couldn't stop. She said she didn't feel pain until around 8 o'clock that night. When the swelling kicked in, her superiors had her transported by ambulance to the Washington Hospital Center. There was a lot of swelling and a lot of pain, she told me, but thankfully, the doctors found nothing was broken. Other officers were being treated at the hospital. Christine was released from the hospital at midnight. She came back to the Capitol. I asked her why she didn't go home. She said I wanted to go back to work because I wanted to make sure my friends were all right. We lost Christine that night, not to death or injury, but to the same feelings of betrayal that so many of us feel. She describes it as a resigned bitterness. I understand because I feel the same way. We were let down. We were let down by our citizens, by our elected officials, and by our leadership within the Capitol Police. 2 years later, we are still waiting for answers, still waiting for vindication, still waiting to be made whole.
Wow. God bless Officer Harry Dunn and the Capitol Police officers who defended American democracy on January 6, 2021. And God bless all of law enforcement because they have to deal with these kind of people, you know. Speaking of which, one of these crazy QAnon people who was a candidate, his name, he goes by Vic de Gramont. His real name is Ludwig de Gramont. He's a convicted criminal for credit card theft and assault, reckless endangerment, things like that. He cyber terrorized me for 3 years on this horrible platform called Twitter. You know, these people are criminals. Don't even joke with them. Never ever go to Twitter. It's the worst place on earth, because this is where QAnon and domestic terrorists hang out and talk to each other and share their conspiracy theories. These people are criminals, just as Officer Dunn was describing them. So take care of yourselves. Pray for law enforcement. Pray especially for these officers at the Capitol. For the soul of Officer Brian Sicknick, whose life was sacrificed there. They beat him up so badly that he had a stroke next day. It's correlated. Don't tell me it has nothing to do with it. It's correlated. They beat him so bad that he had a blood clot and then he had a stroke. Thank you. God bless you. God bless America the beautiful. I know most people here are good people, kind, loving people, hospitable people. So don't lose that spirit, okay? Don't get sad when you see that the days are weird and that weird things are happening. We, the vast majority of Americans, are good people. Take care. Have a good night.